Hello everyone and welcome back to another AFL Fantasy Fanatics head-to-head episode where we put two players up against each other to see who we would be picking between the two ahead of the 2025 AFL Fantasy season. I'm your host, Bales, and you can find me at BAILSDT across the socials. This is episode 11 of the series, the second to last episode, and we're talking about a couple of West Coast Eagles. We teased this episode a little bit early in the series, but it is here. And I'm joined by my fellow co-host and AFL Fantasy Fanatic, Tim Guest. Guesty, mate, how are you?
I'm good, mate. Good. Excited to be talking about a couple of players from my team, and it was good. It was kind of fun for me to dig into their stats and kind of do a bit of research on them as well.
Yeah, I think these two are very interesting because it's almost hard to find these stats. You've got to do a deeper dive. It's not as simple as like taking some injured games away or taking like certain games with CBA roles or anything like that. It's quite hard. So I'm looking forward to this episode. I'll be taking Jack Graham and Tim will be taking Liam Baker. And as always, we'll be starting off with, I would normally say guest, but I'll start off with my co-host, Tim. So Tim, why should we be looking at picking Jack Graham in our AFL fantasy sides for 2025?
Jack Graham or Liam Baker, mate?
Did I say Jack Graham? Okay. Liam Baker. Why should we pick Liam Baker? I'll ask myself why should we be picking Jack Graham. Anyway, why should we pick Liam Baker in our team for 2025?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, right? And I think it certainly was a question on people's lips more so maybe a bit earlier in the preseason when we felt like there was a little bit of a lack of value or lack of options in that forward line. Maybe some things have changed. And so, maybe Liam Baker's not so much in people's consideration. I think it's worthwhile the consideration and hence why it was fun for me to kind of dig down into his stats. And like you said, this is not an easy one to kind of analyze. It's kind of hard to figure out what he's going to be doing. So look, I mean, I guess let's have a look just at the basics first, right? So priced at $805,000, which is priced at an average of 78. He's a mid forward, obviously, changed in the off-season from Richmond to the West Coast Eagles, along with Jack Graham. You kind of think that they were following, or, Minnie McWalter was, big on securing them both as, some kind of leadership, I guess, in a young West Coast developing team. At first there were some questions about what role Liam Baker might play, but, and look, primarily I can thank Jepper and Taser for their track watching for this. What we have seen is, rather than maybe getting some CBAs, which we thought was a chance, he's pretty much locked down to that halfback role. And, we saw last year halfbacks were pretty juicy in terms of their scoring. So, to have him available as a forward, is a little bit tasty, right? So we want to kind of break down these stats and see what we can see and maybe try and predict what we think Liam Baker can score. I mean, last year he was playing predominantly a midfield forward mix, averaged about 36% CBAs for the year. And if we break that down, like pre-buy, he was actually having more CBAs, averaging about 44% CBAs. And during that time, averaged 86. Whereas post-buy, that dropped down to 22%, and subsequently his average score dropped to 65. So, it's not like there's an argument like he was scoring big on the back end of the year or something along those lines. Maybe that's why we should be picking him. Basically finished the end of the year forward with an average of about 60. And that's, if we kind of break down post-buy. So, started back in the first 10 games of the year. And sorry, I'm talking about 2023 now, right? So, sorry, I kind of got a little bit mixed up with my notes there, right? So let's just go back on that, right? So if we look at, I guess, that breakdown of the 2024 year, certainly post-buy an average of 65, it doesn't really give us any reason to pick him, right? So we have to kind of dig in and go further back into the years before. 2023 doesn't give us much more clarity either, but because towards the end of 2023, he finished playing more forward, as I said previously, averaging 60 post-buy. But what we can start to look at is in the first 10 games of the year, he was actually started in more of that defensive position. And he actually scored 3 tons during that period with a 120 as well. So, he's got a bit of a ceiling on him is there. If we kind of look at those big scores, what was kind of happening, look across those big scores, he was kind of, and this is pretty consistent across this part of the year where he's playing back, he was kind of getting 1 or 2 kick-ins a game, not a huge amount, but not none. But once again, he still during that period only averaged about 80, which is currently where he's roughly priced. Digging further down into those stats, Okay, so what really produced those big scores? And what it was high mark games, 5, 6, 7, and 8, which then also contributed to a higher number of kicks and gave him those big scores. But, I guess the thing that we've got to think about, is, okay, getting a lot of those +6s, getting those marks down the back, is that something that's really going to happen with West Coast? Look, if we just dig a little bit more further as well, Richmond in 2022, the role was even more uncertain, started forward, went back, and then was kind of all over the place. But once again, if we look at those defender games, averaging about 80, and it was the same kind of story. Those higher games, he was getting some kick-ins. They were higher mark games, which was then contributing to those kind of higher kick games, right? So, we can kind of see that when he scores big, it's marks and kicks, right, and a few kick-ins. So I think that's what we've really got to look at when we start to kind of analyze 2025. Once again, certainly crediting Jepper and Taser for their track watching this year, and what they've noticed is he's pretty much been locked into that halfback role, which has traditionally been a pretty juicy role at West Coast. But they've also reported that there's been a pretty significant change in game style with Minnie Walter there, and they're moving a lot faster, that kind of Richmond-esque style of footy, which is not surprising, obviously, considering where Minnie's coming from. So, once again, it kind of puts a bit of doubt on whether they're going to be chipping it around the back line, and, Baker's going to be able to pop up and get those kind of +6s. So, it kind of leaves me thinking that, just based on that maybe he's looking at around about that 80 average, which he's pretty consistently done when he's played a defender. And for most of those parts with a team that's probably got that kind of faster game style. The only thing where I do think there is some upside is in the kick-ins, right? So if we break down West Coast kick-ins from last year, Gov got most of them, 46%. He's obviously just signed a 1-year extension, and I don't really see anything changing there in terms of the kick-ins. If we look at who was ranked second and third, that was Duggo and Witho, right? So Duggo's, well, not obviously, but it looks like Duggan's going to move into that more midfield role with the Yo injury. So, I think there is an opportunity for Baker, being a pretty good kick to take over maybe his kick-ins. And then, of course, Witho's been delisted. So there's a pretty good argument to say that maybe the most he can do is take up those kind of Duggo and Witho kick-ins. There was also Jaiden Hunt and Tommy Cole also just got a few kick-ins there as well. I guess basically there's about 80 kick-ins to share around then. If he hits those, that's 240 points in a year, but that's really only an upside of about 10 points a game, right? So that might take him from an 80 to a 90. So I kind of really see him as being in that range, 80 to 90. The other thing I think to take into consideration is last year, the highest scorer for the West Coast Eagles, being where they're at as a club, was Elliot Yeo with a 90. So, do we really see anyone going above that 90? Probably not. So I kind of feel like 90 is probably about his ceiling. I don't know if I'd say that 80 is his floor, but I'm pretty confident in that sort of 80 to 90 range. But, does that mean that there's enough value in him for the forward line? And I guess if we kind of look at most people's forward lines right now, everyone's got McRae, Daniel and Smith probably locked away. Hornbag is, I guess with his potential of maybe 10 points of upside, the potential of possibly being an F1, he's probably in a lot of people's sides. Riley Sanders, he's probably got about 20 points upside there in him as well. So, he's in a lot of sides. And then, of course, who's been kind of storming into people's sides in the last couple of weeks is Hugo Garcia. So, I think to knock out those kind of 6 players is going to be a pretty tough task. I think we're a bit spoiled with choice now in the forward line. I think it's going to be, as much as I like him, I think it's, and I'm glad to see him in the Eagles side. I don't think he'll be in my AFL fantasy side this year.
Yeah, he seems like more of an upgrade target for me because you get to actually watch and see what happens. And as you say, like he's priced at 78.5. If you're saying that he's like ceiling's probably a 90, you're needing that to be the ceiling because there's going to be guys that around that price. Like Isaac Rankin is only 14K more. Everyone's expecting him to go around that 90, 95 average grid and get bump in CBA. So he's a very interesting player, obviously priced 805K, 8.4% owned. So a couple people are still on him at the moment. And then like moving to a Jack Graham, who is a bit cheaper there, priced at 64.5. and he is priced at 662k, 5.9% of selected him at the moment. So a little bit more unique, but that little bit of extra cash that's saved could potentially be used elsewhere. And talking about Jack Graham, because we'll move to him now before we sort of pick who'll be out of the two. So Jack Graham, again, he was quite hard to look for stats as well, because he has been another guy that's been moved around a lot as well, has never had over... so besides last year where he had 37%, that was his career high CBAs for the year. Every other year from that, the last few years, it was 6%, 22%, 27%, 23%. So just a very little sprinkling of that midfield, more like that 5th, 6th midfielder that gets a little bit. And you can understand why, right? So when he first came in, his first year was 2017. That was when Richmond started off on their multiple premierships. And he was behind guys like Dusty and Cochin and Prestia when he was staying fit and guys like that. So he was never going to get more than that little sprinkling. He didn't actually attend any CBAs until the COVID year in 2020, where he had the 23%. But between 2019 and 2022, he averaged over 70 in every single year. And that was with career highs in 2019 of a 78.4 and 2021 where he had 78.5. So he had 58.9 in 2020, but with the COVID adjusted, that was over 70. Not quite sure exactly, but with the other ones there. So with that near 80 average, that's 12 points of upside from what we're seeing on what he's priced at. And that's with limited CBAs. I went last year and had a look at what he did with games with 50% CBAs. So he had 6 games last year where he had over 50%. He averaged 76.5. So that's the 12 points of upside we're talking about. And then obviously his career high is a 14-point increase. Obviously going to West Coast, there's that added opportunity of more CBAs. So we've seen in all preseason, again, shout out to, our friends Jep and Taser who've been down at Trap watching, saying Jack Graham's been playing full-time mid. And from what they've heard is that was going to be the case regardless of if Elliot Yeo was there or not. With Yeo not being there, that's added even more opportunity, more responsibility for Jack Graham. He's been training really, really well and one of those leaders already at West Coast. And I think coming over from Richmond with Mini McGualter, he's going to know what he can provide in that midfield. And I expect him to be getting more than that 50% CBAs. I expect him to be in the top 3 West Coast CBA guys for the season. I think you're looking at guys like an Elliot Yeo when he's back, a Tim Kelly, a Harley Reid. They're probably the 3 main guys. I think Jack Graham's probably just ahead because I think he brings that defensive pressure. I just see him getting that bump. I see 60% CBAs. And if that's the case, that I think an 80 average is definitely on the cards here, because he's going from a team that wasn't scoring many fantasy points to another team that's not scoring many fantasy points. But I expect him to still score more than what Richmond were last year and have done in the past, because Richmond, again, have generally been not a high-scoring fantasy side, right? Whereas West Coast, probably similar. I see a slight bump on that, along with the slight bump in CBAs, along with being at a cheaper price. I see him being a potential starting option, depending on how he goes in the Amy Community Series game that he's got in a couple of days. So, Tim, is that sort of what you're thinking with Graham as well? You wanting to see what he scores in this game, and that might determine what it is? You wanting to see the role? What are you wanting to see from Jack Graham this week?
2 things I want to see from him is kind of exactly where he kind of fits into that midfield, in terms of where he ranks, that the 3rd, the 4th midfielder, whether it's second, early stages because Elliot Yeo's out. I guess for me that the kind of player who really kind of does compare with, now that we're, further into the preseason, is probably a Riley Sanders, right? So I think a lot of us kind of got on Riley Sanders really early, thinking there's kind of 20 points of upside there. There's potentially 20 points of upside in Jack Graham as well. And I think Riley Sanders was a pretty safe option for us to jump on, just because we can kind of see the scoring potential in his junior numbers. But we're not really, Bevo is not someone we normally trust, and we're not really certain exactly how he is going to fit in. Right. So I think we'll be watching those 2 players pretty closely in these games this week. And it might be that if Sanders doesn't look as solid as what we think, a lot of people might pivot to someone like a Jack Graham if the midfield role shows up. The final thing that I'm looking for is, once again, it's what we kind of talked about with West Coast before. What is the scoring potential? They're not a great high scoring team. With a faster game style, there's probably going to be a bit less the case. We do know that, we think that Jack Graham's going to provide a lot more of that defensive pressure. So, that could lead him to not be that high of a scorer, right? So, I think there's probably a little bit more confidence in a Sanders over a Jack Graham, but I think this is something we'll be watching closely this week.
Yeah, I agree. I think Sanders is, if we were doing that comparison, as you say, that's probably the perfect comparison that we could have done. But so much has changed since we recorded that first episode that we don't normally chat about two players in the series. So that would have been a really good comparison with Sanders there. So if you want to hear mine and Warnie's thoughts on Sanders, check that the very first episode that one was. But yeah, if you're picking between the two, it's it is Riley Sanders out of the two. And then Jack Graham v. Baker is the interesting one because there's that bit of price difference. And I think it's for Baker, it's the kick-ins and that the +6s. And Jack Graham, it's the CBAs and the tackles. So it's really interesting. And they're going to be both big players to watch in the Pracky games. And where do you start either of them? Or if maybe someone loves West Coast forwards out there and wants to start as many as they can just to see how they go, then maybe you start both. But I feel like they could almost be guys that you could just jump on in the first few weeks because they're not very expensive. Like they're both like Baker's just a tick over 800. Graham's like 662. So you can pivot around and I think you can pick one of those. But it has come to the time where we'll pick between the two. Tim, who will be picking between Liam Baker and Jack Graham?
For the time being, I think there's a little bit more upside in a Jack Graham just with the way things have played out so far.
Yeah, I agree. I think the price is a big thing there as well, as you say. I think the upside's there. And Baker's a guy that I feel like he's not going to, as you say, his career high age is 90. What was it, like 78? And you said his ceiling, is 90. I don't feel like he's going to burn you if you don't start him. Whereas a Jack Graham, I could see him getting off to a 90, 95 start if he has a big game or two in the first few weeks with some high tackle numbers and gets off to a good start. That cash gen gets going. So I feel like you're more likely to get burnt from a Graham than you are a Baker. But in saying that, I don't know if either are going to burn you. So I'd be going Jack Graham as well. Are you currently starting either of these two guys in your side?
Not at the moment, mate.
Yeah, as the West Coast glasses, if they put them on, are you tempted to start a couple of them?
Look, like I think I said earlier, it just, we've just had a few other options come up in the forward line. So, I don't think either of them are bad picks. I think they're worthy of consideration. Like you said, I kind of think there's maybe only about 12 points in Baker. There could be 20 points in Graham and maybe a little bit more in those first few games. But yeah, it's going to be hard to fit him into the forward line at the moment with, like a Hugo Garcia and a Horn Francis sitting there, like I said, a Riley Sanders as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and even when you just look at the ownership as well, those forwards like Bailey Smith sitting at just a tick under 70%, so everyone's on him. Caleb Daniel, 61.32%. Jack McRae, 54%. Even Elijah Hewitt, another West Coast player we didn't even chat about today. He's at just under 51%. Horn Francis is 46.79%. Then you've got guys like Kako, Sanders are both over 30%. Curtin, Stone, 20%. Then you've got a guy like Hugo Garcia that's risen from like 2% to near 15% in a couple of days. So, as you say, it's tight for spots in the forward line. Maybe you put a Hugo Garcia in your midfield to fit maybe a Graham if he goes off on the weekend. But, yeah, very, very interesting with these two players. And, yeah, will be interesting to see how they go. I currently don't have either. Had Baker in my original team, and Graham's been floating through there as well. So I have had both, but whether I start them, I don't know if I'll be able to fit them in. So, but that'll be the end of the episode. Thank you very much, Tim, for jumping on with me for the episode. But people, let us know in the comments below if you would pick Jack Graham or Liam Baker in your fantasy sides. And let us know if you have Riley Sanders ahead of the two. I assume you probably would, but let us know if you have either of these two guys ahead of Sanders or where you'd rank them. And any other questions or comments that you guys have on the episode or the series so far, put them in the comments below and I'll get to those when I can. But Tim, as I said, thanks for jumping on to me, mate. Where can the people find you across the socials? And also just a quick plug for the listeners, if they haven't heard already, about the Content Creators Cup and something special they might be able to get involved in.
Yeah, on socials, Tim Guest AU, anywhere. I'm sure if you listen to this, you've heard about the Content Creators Cup competition, chance to be the 20th coach. Just make sure you register for the Master Your Money Infinite Wealth online program at infinitewealth.com.au/AFL Fantasy to be in the chance to be that 20th coach.
Yeah,
get around it. Yeah, March 10. Yeah, cool.
Yeah, beautiful. No, get around it. And you can find me at BAILSDT, and you can find us at AFL Fantasy Fans across the socials. We've got one more episode to go on Friday with Liam jumping on to me to chat about another couple of rucks, because I feel like the rucks is a revolving door of who we're going to be picking in just 2 positions. So very, very interesting to see what his thoughts are on that. And if you want more extra content and want to help support us, then head over to our Patreon, patreon.com/AFL Fantasy Fanatics there. And you can get all bonus content. Plus, you go into a league, cash league, and you can win some cash prize. And the more people that enter, the more money that could be up for grabs. So make sure you guys get involved in that. All links are in the description. And we'll catch you guys on Friday for our final episode of Head to Head. So thanks, everyone. See you then. See ya.
See ya.